On Friday, Iran temporarily reopened the Strait of Hormuz. That should have been the one clean signal the whole world was waiting for. Ships move, pressure drops, the truce starts looking real, and the most dangerous corridor in the Gulf stops, acting like a live weapon. But the opening came with a threat baked into it. Tehran made clear that if the U.S. blockade on Iranian shipping stayed in place, the strait could close again. So even at the exact moment the word reopened hit the headlines, the foundation under it was already cracked. That crack mattered because the problem was never just whether the lane was technically open. The real question was whether ships actually had freedom to move without getting trapped inside somebody else's pressure game. Even as the opening was being sold, doubts were already hanging over how much freedom commercial traffic really had. That is the part people miss when they treat a choke point like a door. A waterway like this can be declared open on paper and still be dangerous, politicized, and half-controlled in practice. Then the reversal came fast enough to kill the illusion before it could settle. Iran reversed its reopening of the crucial waterway the next day, which means the title is not stretching the sequence at all. It really did reopen, and it really did snap shut. That alone should tell you this was not a stable de-escalation slipping out of control. It was a short, conditional opening inside an unresolved fight. And once Washington made clear it was keeping pressure in place, Tehran answered by taking the lane back under force. If you want this channel when the official story starts sounding too smooth for the facts underneath it, subscribe now. And after this video, tell me one thing straight. Was Friday ever a real reopening? Or was it only a warning shot, dressed up as progress? The water answered before the politicians did. A container ship 25 nautical miles northeast of Oman was hit by an unknown projectile, with damage reported to some containers and no fire or environmental impact. That sounds small until you understand what it means. When commercial shipping starts taking hits in the same window that governments are claiming progress, the sea is telling the truth faster than the diplomacy. It is saying that whatever was reopened in language was not reopened in trust. By Saturday evening, traffic was back to a standstill. That is the operational verdict on the whole Friday announcement. Not optimism, not momentum, standstill. A real reopening widens confidence hour by hour. It pulls more ships into the lane, lowers hesitation, and starts building its own credibility. This did the opposite. The minute the route had to prove itself under live conditions, confidence drained out of it and the corridor slid right back toward paralysis. And this is where the story stops being soft and becomes brutally simple. CENTCOM had already said U.S. forces would begin implementing a blockade on ships entering or exiting Iranian ports. That means the opening and the blockade were living side by side at the same time. One side was saying the strait was open for commerce. The other side was saying Iranian maritime access would still be squeezed until Washington got what it wanted. That is not peace trying to break through. That is a coercive argument continuing under a new headline. So here is the split underneath everything. Washington wanted the benefits of a reopened corridor without giving up the leverage of a blockade. Tehran wanted the symbolism of reopening without surrendering control over the terms of passage. Put those two positions together and you do not get stability. You get a narrow lane full of false signals, where every ship has to guess whether the next instruction is commercial, military, or political. That is why this story is bigger than one weekend's chaos. It is about who gets to define what open even means in the Gulf. If one side can keep a blockade alive while saying trade can move, and the other can restore military control while saying it is defending lawful navigation, then language itself becomes part of the weapon system. The first reaction from outside the region showed how badly the world wanted the easy version of events. Oil tumbled after Iran said it would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which means markets briefly priced in something more than just one maritime adjustment. They priced in relief. They priced in a corridor starting to behave normally again. But that move also exposed a weakness. A lot of money reacted to the word reopened before the route had earned the right to be believed. The ships corrected that fantasy almost immediately. After a short-lived rise in transit attempts, the reopening failed to mature into anything that looked durable. And that matters because real reopenings change behavior. Operators start committing hulls, insurers start recalculating risk, Captains stopped treating every mile like a negotiation with armed strangers. None of that really happened here. Movement flickered, tested the water, and then ran straight into the same old wall of pressure, uncertainty, and live force. Picture the people inside that gap. A captain gets told the strait is open, a ship starts forward, then the next signal says conditions are unclear, traffic is stalling, or the lane is back under armed management. That is how state pressure becomes human pressure, not as a theory, not as a panel discussion, as a man on a bridge deciding whether to keep going into a corridor where every side claims it is acting lawfully and none of them can guarantee his safety. And once a choke point reaches that state, normal commerce does not just slow down. It starts doubting every official word it hears. That is why this story was never really about a clean open-close sequence. It was about trust getting destroyed in public, in one of the few places on Earth where destroyed trust immediately turns into global risk. By the time tracking data showed almost no vessel movement, the argument had already been settled by the route itself. Whatever Friday's announcement had been, worth politically, it had failed commercially and operationally. A corridor that is truly reopened does not end up almost empty, while both sides keep accusing each other of violations. That emptiness tells you the lane is no longer functioning as infrastructure. It is functioning as leverage, and every ship not moving becomes proof of that. Then Tehran removed the last layer of ambiguity. Iranian commanders said the strait had returned to its previous status under strict management and control by the armed forces. That wording is cold, but it is useful because it kills the idea that this was just confusion or bad communication. This was a decision, a deliberate reassertion of force over passage. Once you hear that phrase, you are no longer dealing with a truce wobbling at the edges. You are dealing with the state saying the corridor itself is back inside the military file. And that is where the information war gets vicious. Washington can say Iran exposed itself as a choke point blackmailer the minute pressure stayed on. Tehran can say the US exposed its own bad faith by keeping a blockade alive while pretending a left ceasefire had meaning. Both stories are useful. Both stories buy room for the next move, and both stories are aimed at the same prize, the right to escalate without owning the blame. The dangerous part is that neither side needs a perfect argument. Each side only needs an argument strong enough to hold its coalition together while pressure continues. That means the fight over Hormuz is not just military or economic. It is legal, psychological, and narrative at the same time. And that is exactly why it keeps getting harder to separate diplomacy from coercion. By that point, the honest reading was already staring everyone in the face. The strait would not fully reopen and remained under Tehran's strict control. That means Friday was never the beginning of a restored maritime order. It was a narrow release of pressure inside a contest neither side had actually decided to end. Tehran showed it could loosen the corridor. Washington showed it would not trade away leverage for symbolism. And when the two positions collided, the lane snapped back into its real role. Hard pressure. Now bring Trump back into the center of the frame, because this is where a lot of weak scripts start losing the title. The second half of the title is not decoration. It is the live escalation layer. The failed opening did not just embarrass diplomacy. It handed Trump a new argument. Iran was not merely resisting. Iran was now violating and reversing what had been presented as progress. That creates space for a harsher threat posture, and he used it. Trump's language then moved straight to infrastructure. He threatened to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran if Tehran did not accept U.S. terms, and paired that with no more Mr. Nice guy. That is not just louder talk, it is a sharper bargaining frame. The pressure is no longer limited to sanctions, naval presence, or vague warnings. It is now being spoken in terms of wreckage, repair costs, blackout risk, and national humiliation. And the timing matters just as much as the threat itself. Talks are being pushed forward, while threats against power plants and bridges stay fully alive in the same breath. That means the White House is not presenting diplomacy as an alternative to escalation. It is presenting diplomacy as the final chance before escalation gets wider and uglier. That is harder now in the exact way the title promises. Not because the tone is spicy, because the cost being threatened has moved upward. Earlier pressure was still brutal. but it left more room for people to pretend the standoff could be managed in compartments. Sanctions here, naval moves there, talks somewhere else. This posture strips away that separation. Now the message is blunt. The shipping lane can seize up, talks can limp forward, and civilian infrastructure can still sit openly on the target ladder at the same time. That is a serious escalation in the political meaning of the crisis. Because once bridges and power plants become explicit leverage, the conflict stops sounding like a dispute over terms and starts sounding like a contest over who can make normal life collapse faster if the other side refuses to bend. Tehran has not made that easy for Washington to package as simple progress. There is currently no decision by Iran to send negotiators, which tells you the maritime fight is not sitting beside the tech diplomacy track, it is inside it. Iran cannot walk into talks under blockade pressure and still look like it negotiated from strength. So every hour that Hormuz remains unstable makes the diplomacy look less like progress and more like a struggle over who's allowed to arrive without losing face. That matters because once talks become face contests under live military pressure, even small gestures start carrying too much weight. A partial opening looks like retreat. A reversal looks like defiance. A ship turning back looks like proof. A threat against infrastructure looks like resolve. The whole crisis starts compressing political meaning into operational moments. And that makes the next misstep easier to trigger and harder to contain. And this is why the rest of the world cannot treat the whole thing as regional theater. Flows through the Strait of Hormuz account for more than 1/4 of total global seaborne oil trade. So when this corridor stops behaving like reliable infrastructure, the damage does not stay near the Gulf. It moves outward into freight, fuel, inflation, insurance, supply chains, strategic reserves, and political headaches in capitals nowhere near the shooting. A false reopening in a place like this is not harmless. It is destabilizing. A narrow strip of water can carry an entire geopolitical argument inside it. That is what happened here. Iran used access to show it still had leverage. Washington used continued blockade pressure to show it would not be talked out of leverage cheaply. The corridor became the place where both sides tried to prove they could set the terms without looking like the one that blinked first. So the answer to the central question is hard, but it is clean. Yes, Hormuz reopened in form. No, it did not reopen in the only way that really mattered. Safe, trusted, usable passage never came back. What returned was a short release of pressure inside a structure that was still built for coercion. That is why the snapshot mattered more than the initial opening. The opening created hope. The reversal exposed the weakness underneath it. And Trump's harder threats showed what happens when a tactical opening fails to produce compliance. The language jumps from pressure to destruction. So no, this was not a reopening that collapsed by accident. It was a reopening that exposed the argument still running under the ceasefire. U.S. blockade pressure stayed alive. Iranian military control came back. Commercial traffic froze. And once the route stopped behaving like a normal corridor again, the political mood in Washington shifted toward a harsher public threat. That is the real shape of the story, not a neat diplomatic rise and fall. A short opening, a fast reclosure, and a harder American threat posture built on the claim that Iran had turned the corridor back into a weapon. That is what people came for, and that is what the sea confirmed. The ugliest part is still ahead, because a lane like this can survive rhetoric. It can survive threats. What it cannot survive for long is both sides insisting their own coercion is lawful, while the ships in the middle stop believing either of them. If a captain can hear open on Friday and turn back on Saturday, then nobody has stabilized this crisis. They are just trying to make the other side pay more for refusing. The next real answer will not come from a podium. It will come from the next ship that either moves through Hormuz safely or doesn't.